Yes, hello. Thank you everyone so much for joining. I'm Claire. I'm an event lead here at Capital One. And so what that means is I spend my time each day sharing opportunities at Capital One with students across the US. We are so happy to have you here with us today. I am going to start my screen share. So you should be able to see my screen. We're going to use these slides to give you a look inside of our application process. So yeah, just chatting through the agenda or what we wanted to share with you all today. We're going to go over our application process. And then just to help be prepared for any type of application process, we wanted to talk through some tips that will be helpful just in general, as well as that. So we'll do a resume overview, share details about what to expect and include in your resume. We'll talk a little bit more about ways to make your resume actionable and active and less passive. We'll share some virtual interviewing tips, and then of course we'll have time for Q&A. We always love the Q&As here on Way Up. You guys bring the best questions, so we're looking forward to saving some time for that. As I mentioned, I'm Claire. I'm an events lead. One of the things that I share in every Way Up event is that I believe the best way to get to know Capital One is to get to know our people. So I always try to bring our people to you all here at Way Up, and share with you some of the great people that we get to work with each and every day. So I will pass now to Brianne to introduce herself as our recruiter on the phone.
Thanks, Claire. My name is Brianne Kretschmar, and I am a senior tech recruiter here at Capital One. I've been here for just over a year and I'm loving it here. So I'm super excited to share with you today about our program. So the program I specifically recruit for is our Tdp program, and I sit out of the McLean office. And I attended George Mason University. I'd love to pass it on to Sabrina now.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sabrina Pang. I am located in the Plano, Texas office. I've lived in Texas all my life, grew up here, and I went to Southern Methodist University in Dallas, Texas. I studied finance and computer science. Decided I wanted to go more of the computer science route, but my finance degree ended up paying off because I'm working at Capital One. I was until very recently part of the technology development program here at Capital One. It's a 2-year rotational program for campus hires from computer science-ish backgrounds. And I just hit my 2 years here. And so now I graduated from the program and now I'm just a software engineer. Yeah. I'll pass it on to Sydney.
Okay. Hey, everyone. I'm Sydney. I'm currently based in New York. I'm originally from Los Angeles. I attended USC, University of Southern California, and I majored in cognitive science with a minor in mobile app development. I started at Capital One as a CODA associate, which is a 6-month boot camp in preparation for the Tdp program. I started in August 2020 and am now a second-year Tdp.
Thank you. And I'm going to now take it to the application overview. So I'm going to go over a little bit of each of our programs here, go in depth a little bit more. As I mentioned, I specifically recruit for our technology internship program and technology development program. And I can certainly speak a little bit more to each of the roles, but I'm happy to answer any in-depth questions about the Tdp program that you may have today. So let's start off with the Tdp program. So our Tdp program is an 18-month rotational program that we have here. So it consists of a 12-month rotation and then a 6-month rotation. As you may have heard, they just mentioned that it was a 2-year rotational program. We've now shifted it into an 18-month model based on feedback that we've received and wanted to improve the process a little bit. So it is now an 18-month rotational program. And the goal of that program is to really give you exposure to different leaders and programs and to really help you figure out what you like best within our technology fields. We really just want to help you develop your technical skills and build on your experience and skill sets and languages and technologies here. That's the purpose of the Tdp program. Our CODA program is our Capital One Developer Academy program. And that is a 6-month intensive training program that essentially prepares analytical, non-computer science students for careers in software engineering. Students will essentially learn to code from the tech college instructors and will work primarily in JavaScript to learn full stack development. And upon successful completion of the program, CODA associates will potentially funnel into the Tdp program, as you've heard One of our panelists previously attended our CODA program and has now shifted into TDP. The ADP program is essentially for data analysts to help solve complex data problems that enable insights into customer behavior and operational performance. This role is at the intersection between business strategy and technology. Then we have our CRP program. So the interns for this program focus on learning key commercial banking functions and products, client needs, and related analysis and presentation skills. The internship will culminate with a case. Graduates will essentially be prepared for a variety of credit and risk-related roles. So then we have our Tdp program. Designers on the digital team work closely with other designers, strategists, developers, product managers, and business analysts to further our understanding of how people interact with their money. So designers solve complex problems by using human-centered design to improve consumers' relationships with money. Then you have our Frp program. Our Frp program allows Frp associates to manage Capital One's finances and provide analysis and reporting. The roles focus on strategy development, business execution, and financial management in corporate finance and accounting. Then you've got our Hrrp program. Now, Hrrp associates will specialize in attracting, recruiting, and maintaining top-performing associates for Capital One. The Hrrp program is designed to cultivate strategic and proactive leaders within HR. So you will experience rotations with high-performing teams within talent acquisition, compensation, or our HR business partner or HR specialist roles. Then you have the MRP program, where associates specialize in delivering complex cross-functional initiatives that drive the business forward. So think delivery management. MRP associates will have an opportunity to experience roles within 2 of 4 different job families that we have available. So we've got the agile delivery lead, project management, process management, risk management. So you would have the opportunity to rotate through 2 of those. And then finally, we have our PDP program. So as a product manager at Capital One, you'll be at the heart of shipping new products and driving innovation on platforms that delight and improve the experiences of our external and internal customers, expanding our reach into new spaces and impacting the bottom line on a daily basis. So the role will challenge you to understand and manage trade-offs between customer needs, business strategy, and technology. And then as far as our application, overview. So first off, you're starting here by attending one of our events, which is wonderful. We're so happy to have you here. These are ongoing, and we certainly recommend that you also explore the careers blog. There's plenty of resources there. I'll drop that link in the chat for you as well. But it's really a wonderful resource as you start to embark on your career and learn about our culture here and, how we, proceed here at Capital One. Then we also have workshops that we put on, skill building workshops. And then we're now in the phase of the application process. So we opened our applications in August, and both full-time and intern requisitions were posted for all of the roles I started to mention on our last slide. So feel free to take a look at our website and apply to what is relevant to you. And then once you apply and you go through the process, we have our interviews open from September to December during this time frame. And one thing I do want to call out is that you can apply for multiple programs, but I will ask that you narrow your focus into what is really important for you and most relevant to you. So just keep in mind that it is our policy that we're only able to have you interview for one role at a time. So you can apply to more than one, but just keep in mind that that's where our focus is. And I will turn it over to Sabrina for a resume review.
Yeah. Okay, so let's start off with the resume review portion of our webinar today. So I'm sure all of y'all have heard about or have heard or know what a resume is, but we're just going to go over some tips and tricks for you guys to, make it easier for you guys to apply to some of our positions and kind of present yourself, give a great first impression to the company. So let's just start off with kind of the key sections of a good resume. So resume writing is kind of an art. But there are some key components that all resumes should have. So these are things like contact information, so we can contact you, so like email, phone number sometimes, education. So this is like, where you go to school or any certificates or licenses that you might have, any professional experience that you have. So this is like internships or work experience at school, for example, and then any other skills, leadership experience, awards, involvement, and volunteer experience that you have. So that's kind of a lot in that last section, but anything that would, tell us that you might be a great candidate for the role. So your resume is really meant to land you the interview. So that's that, first entry into the job role. And then after that, your interviewing skills and your interactions with your employer are the things that will get you the job. So I mentioned earlier that resume writing is a bit of an art. So while there are many ways to actually format your resume, you should aim to create a resume that tells your unique story, right? So you don't want your resume, even if you use the same format as someone else, you don't want it to tell the same story as someone else. You want it to represent who you truly are. So there are a lot of ways to format your resume. Even if you search up on Google, there's so many different templates online. And just know that as you get feedback from people on your resume, which I would definitely recommend, you'll probably receive a lot of different opinions and recommendations. They might even clash sometimes. So, just kind of when you're getting feedback, consolidate it from everyone to kind of create the perfect resume that will tell your unique story and make sure that it really represents who you are as a candidate. And then when you're formatting your resume, the order and the length of the sections on your resume will kind of vary based on your experiences. So for example, if you have a lot of professional experience, then that section might be a lot longer than, the section for your volunteer or your leadership experience. And maybe vice versa. If you maybe don't have a ton of work experience yet because you're still in school, right? Maybe you only have maybe you don't have any internships yet, but maybe you have a work study job. So your professional experience would have your work study job, and then you're involved in a lot of clubs and you do a lot of community involvement initiatives. So you would put all of that in the leadership / volunteer experience. So definitely highlight like what you have and what you're good at. And then we mentioned kind of these 4 sections here on the screen. These 4 sections are present in both of these example resumes, but you can see that the example resumes actually look quite different. So there are definitely different ways of formatting the same material. Just go with whatever format you think looks, visually appealing and whatever, you think represents you the best. I know some candidates and students will put an objective at the beginning of their resume. That's optional, but it's also a nice section to include because it's like the first thing that they usually see on your resume. So you say, my objective is to become, a very skilled and competent software engineer for Capital One. Sorry, that's just an example that I just thought of off the top of my head. But it's usually optional, but you can definitely put it at the top of your resume to make your resume stand out. Just typically for college students, you'll have the education section listed at the top because we look at graduation date and things like that. So make sure you put your major there, your graduation date, all of that important education material at the top. And then this is just kind of a wrap up for this part. So think about what kind of sections or headings you currently have on your resume. Obviously, we gave you 4 that we think are, a great starting point for, formatting your resume. So, you don't necessarily have to conform exactly to the wording that we had on those, but those are kind of highlighting the general categories that we really would love for you to represent on your resume. And I'll pass it off to Sydney for the next section.
Yeah, so leadership and volunteer opportunities, these are very important. You want to include any leadership and student experiences that you've had. be specific in the position that you've held and give a high-level overview of any skills that you gained in that position. Also, leadership and volunteer experience doesn't have to be exclusively related to school. It can be in your extracurricular activities as well as in your community. As far as professional experience, you want to give the company name, your title, again, a high-level overview of any skills and responsibilities. And you want to use action verbs. A tip that I always give for looking at software engineering job descriptions is look at the job description and try to incorporate some of the technical buzzwords and characteristics that they use. Because even though if you don't have much technical experience, you can still display qualities that make yourself a good software engineer. Also, describe your accomplishments. You want to make it quantifiable. So numbers are really good in explaining what impact you had in your role. As far as education, of course, include the university degree and any minors. And I want to say that if you don't have too much professional experience, maybe pick a couple course projects that you've done. Pick one or two, give a brief description of them so that the reviewer has an idea of what you've worked on in college. Also, your GPA, include if it's above 3.0. Some opportunities do have a GPA cutoff, but most you should be fine. Another best practice to do is to remain consistent in the way you are formatting your resume. You want to use the same type of fonts and make use of all the white space on your resume. You want to stick to one page as far as applying to jobs, and start sentences with bullets. You don't need a paragraph. Also, spell check. This is a big one. Many times you think your writing is pretty good and it's not. Leverage a proofreader. I'll say you can even just read your resume aloud to yourself. You'll be surprised at how many errors you can catch that way. And also ensure that the info is relevant to the position that you're applying for. And also indicate where something took place. Now I'll pass it off.
Yes, we also got a great question about work experience and how to list that. I think that's a great question for us to address at the end. So I am going to let us finish up with a few more tips about the resume. And then maybe after that, before we move into interviewing tips, we'll talk specifically about what experience and how much to improve. So Sabrina, I think you were going to do a few more tips to make the resume and making your resume.
Cool. I'll pick back up with talking about how you can make your resume more impactful. So the first thing that we kind of want you to look at is what active verbs are you currently using in your resume and which active verbs should you use for your resume, right? There are, obviously, it's a very popular way of formatting your resume is, putting a position, for example, and then bullet pointing what you did at that position, or putting a project and then bullet pointing like, the features of the project or what the project does, or what you did for the project, what your portion for it was for. So, our tip and trick here for verbs is to mix and match them and use active verbs. So a common way that students kind of represent what they're doing is they say, I was responsible for XYZ in a project. And was responsible is, when you're talking to someone, you can say, yeah, I was responsible for this, but it is passive. And so we've kind of provided you a whole laundry list of active verbs that you can use here. I know another popular one that is an active verb is managed, but you can use managed, but don't use managed in every single bullet point, right? Like mix and match them. There's tons here, and there's administered instead of managed. There's lots of like synonyms in this list as well. A thesaurus is your best friend. So definitely think about the way that you're wording each bullet point, because once someone sees, managed, or is responsible for so many times, it's a little bit repetitive. So you definitely want to keep whoever's reading your resume on their toes. It makes for an enjoyable read. And so the hiring community just basically, they don't really want to reread the job description that they posted. So don't copy and paste the job description and put it in your resume, thinking that might be, you know, the best way to get someone's attention. We really want to know like what you did, right? So like some questions are like, what did you do? How did you do it? What results did you achieve at that position or for that project? And then how did you lead? Like what kind of leadership do you have in your work experience or your project experience? And so another tip that we have is to add numbers to your resume, no matter what your work actually involves. So numbers really help show recruiters the impact that you've made during your work experience. So when we, when we see numbers, we know not only did you make an impact, but you also, we also know how much of an impact you made, right? So we definitely want to know kind of like obviously it's great to know what you did. We want to know, we want to quantify that and see how much impact you made. So 3 ways to quantify are use a range, indicate frequency, or show scale, or you can do all 3. But we'll kind of show you some examples of this because I know that can be a little bit confusing. Okay, so sometimes, you have a specific number. So for example, you were a teaching assistant in college, for example, and you were grading students' work. It's obviously you can put an exact figure on your resume, but definitely don't stress out about putting an exact figure, especially I know that a lot of work and school environments are really dynamic, so you might add a student or remove a student, so just use a range instead, right? So for example, in this case, it's we say responsible for supervising undergraduate researchers. So that's the before statement. So the first thing I want to note here is it says is responsible for. We definitely want to use an active verb here. And also we don't have, the hiring manager looking at your resume doesn't actually know how many undergraduate researchers you supervised, right? It might only be 2, and that's plural. So you definitely, if you have more, you definitely want to highlight that, right? So you want to say supervise. So that's a very strong verb to start off with. So you want to say supervise 7 to 12 undergraduate research students every year. Yeah, in this case, this person did it, every year. And, obviously you might have a different number of undergraduate research students every year. So they used a range. So supervise 7 to 12 undergraduate research students each year who have all since gone on to graduate school in XYZ fields. So this gives the hiring manager a sense of their management scope for these research students. The second thing is frequency. So we want you to include how frequently you do a particular task. This is actually really helpful when when you're doing something and it's very high volume, so you do it very frequently. This can show us how much scope you have over whatever project or work experience that you were participating in. So in this case, this person was in charge of completing first editing passes on articles. And so completed is, it's an active verb, but in this case, I feel like an editing pass, you can definitely break that down. There's this is a whole long process, right? So completed is just, a pretty generic verb. In this case, we have changed that to reviewed and evaluated, right? Those are 2 different, very active verbs that you can use. And then also, how many articles did you actually do? Did you just do 1? Did you just 2? In this case, we reviewed and evaluated 40 to 50 topical articles per week. And then you talked about making the decision to pass articles to the editorial team or send articles back to authors for further revisions. So you can see just based on the first 2 slides that we've gone over for, how to quantify your impact. You definitely want to provide enough detail, enough body to whatever bullet point you're putting there. You want to use active verbs, and you also, in this case, you want to showcase how frequently you actually did this, 40 to 50 topical articles per week, because it actually shows kind of the scope of the work that you're doing. And then next slide, this is our last part of quantifying the impact on your resume. So indicating scale can help provide context and showcase areas of leadership. So again, our before statement, responsible for chairing the student event promotional committee. Definitely want to change the is responsible for to an active verb. And there's not a ton of detail. And, you know, what is the committee responsible for? Like how, you know, how much money were you, you know, managing, how many people were you managing, et cetera. So in this case, changing it to chaired, active verb, promotional committee of 12. So you were managing a committee of 12 folks, and then presenting marketing plans to an audience of 40 to 60 students. So that's even more scope that you're showing there with your presentation skills. At weekly university senate meetings open to all 2,000 community members. So that shows kind of like, you know, a potential for presenting up to 2,000 community members. So these are just like the 3 slides that we just went over are just kind of examples of ways you can incorporate numbers into your resume. I just went to a recruiting event in person at a university, and when they said, hey, can you review my resume? This was like the #1 thing I saw on resumes and the #1 thing that I told people. It's a very, in my opinion, like it's not a very difficult fix. And it's something that makes a lot of difference. So would definitely recommend incorporating range, frequency, and scale into your resume bullet points. And I'll pass it back to you guys.
Yes, and before we go into like the assessment and interview, I did think that this might be a good time to chat about experience and how much experience, because I think we shared in our resume section details about making sure that you include experience and trying to make it as relevant as possible, but also making sure that you have good white space and that your resume speaks to your qualifications and specific things that attach to the role and show your qualifications for that role. And so recently I was in a resume review where someone gave the example of they had been a dance teacher in school, and they had wanted to include that on their resume because it showed work experience and it showed leadership and management of sometimes stressful situations, but they wanted to make sure that that wasn't over-indexed. And so I think that was a really good example where it was work experience and it shows that you have some work experience, some leadership, some experience being in front of a room, managing, more difficult situations. But it was something that they included very briefly just to show that. And then they used more space in the resume that they could have expanded on the dance teacher space, but they used more space in the resume to share a project that they had done in school, or details about things that were specific to that role. And so I think the answer is yes, and to that. So like maybe not all work experience, but work experience that shows what you've been busy doing and what you've been spending your time on and where you've been growing in the work field, and catering even that to help show why that's built strengths in you. And you can, like Sabrina just shared, you can add numbers and quantifiable things to nearly everything. Sabrina, I think like I'd love to hear your response to like how much and what experience to share, and maybe even like the dance teacher example of like, including that just briefly. Do you agree that is something that's a good practice?
So Claire, just to reiterate, you said, do I have any best practice to share?
I think just like, do you agree that like sharing some work experience is good, but not over indexing and trying to make sure you're using real estate for the things that relate directly to the job? And then where you can, translating that work experience to be relevant for the job. I think that was good advice that I've heard recently and wanted to hear your feedback.
Yes, I get what you're saying. So I would urge you to think that less is more in this case, right? Like just because you have all the experience doesn't mean it's necessarily relevant to what you're looking to do. Past experience is great, but there's only so much of it, right? Like you don't want to list every single job function that you did. You want to hit like the main points there, and have more to expand on should you be invited in to interview. And for past experiences, say they're not necessarily relevant, you can certainly hit the main points that are maybe most relevant to what you're looking to do. So if it's construction that you've done in the past, like I saw that was an example in the chat, and you're looking to go into finance, maybe you helped manage part of the construction process, like the billing or you manage the contracting officer representative standpoint, like, the billing, the contracting piece, the budgeting for it, anything that's maybe, kind of relevant in that regard. It doesn't have to be big scale either, especially as you're starting into the role, but we want to see your passions aligned with what you're looking to do. So that's what I would say. Definitely think about, what exemplifies what you're looking to do next.
I love that. I also love the construction example in the space of being able to share spaces where you may have leaned in as a leader, spaces where you may have leaned in on, impacting results. I think like every job wants to know like how you made your last workplace better. And so things like that are also great ways to share that work experience and make it relevant.
And to that point, I would also say, think about the STAR method: situation, task, action, and result. We really want to hear how you were a main driver in whatever results, came of the scenario. So I would definitely think about those as you're starting to craft your resume, or even as you're going into the interview process, because like Claire said, we really just want to hear about how you made your last position or company better. What were your contributions there? So.
Okay, we have a couple more questions about resume, but I think now might be a good time to move into the assessment and interview, because I think we'll talk a little bit more about expanding on your resume and the details there. And then we'll come back to some of these questions. I've marked a few that we'll answer live. So Brian, I'm going to pass back to you and let you chat us through assessments and interviews.
Perfect. I'm excited to answer some of those questions live. So definitely keep those coming in. Thank you for asking those. So to go into the assessment portion of the application process. So there are certain nuances to each role that I've mentioned previously. There's a whole bunch of roles that we are hiring for. So this is a high level overview, so just keep that in mind. But for our tech roles, you'll have a code signal assessment, and this will be done after applying. So once you apply and it's determined that you meet the basic qualifications for the role. So just keep in mind, when you're applying, there's the basic qualifications and then there's the preferred qualifications for each role. So just be mindful of those as you're applying. And then once those are determined that those are met, you'll receive a link with the link to complete the assessment. Please keep in mind with Code Signal, you'll have 14 days to complete this within receiving it. So be mindful of the application process and time frame. So if you're in the middle of midterms or finals, or it's a really busy season in your life, I would recommend maybe applying when you have the bandwidth for it. So just keep in mind that it'll be the 14-day window that you'll receive, very close to applying. The interview portion. So this really is an opportunity for us to get to know you and vice versa. Really here at Capital One, we're really just looking to get to know you better. That's all our goal is here with the interview process. So this will be the time for you to showcase your technical skills, problem solving, communication abilities, and your analytical thought process. So you'll receive 3 different interviews throughout your Power Day. So we call them Power Days here. And they are typically in 4-hour chunks. And one of those is going to be a 1-hour break. So you'll have 3 interviews throughout that time and then a 1-hour break. So just keep that in mind. They'll all be via Zoom. You won't be asked to come in for the interview. And then for the offer, you will receive both a verbal and written offer from your recruiter. We definitely want to take that moment to celebrate you and your wonderful accomplishment. To even be invited in for an interview is an accomplishment in of itself. So we certainly want to take that moment to celebrate you with the offer, and you'll have that time to ask any outstanding questions and so on and so forth. We will also go over location with you at that time of offer. For post-offer, the process. So we actually have a buddy process here, which is really great. So you'll be connected with a current TDP associate or one that's a recent graduate from the TDP program. And they'll essentially serve as a mentor, so to speak, and they'll be wonderful in asking or answering all of your questions and continuing to advocate for you throughout the process. Your recruiter is also a resource and advocate for you throughout the process. So you have plenty of outlets for asking those questions and resources. We really want to make sure that you are the best equipped as you make this decision for embarking on your career here at Capital One. And then one other thing I do want to also call out with the Power Day, some of the interviews you'll have will actually be with a current TDP associate or a graduate from the Tdp program. So that would be a great time to reserve some of those specific TDP questions or anything you want to learn a little bit more about in relation to Capital One and our tech program. So I would recommend keeping that in mind for our interview process. And then onboarding, after accepting your offer, we will have the hiring logistics team reach out to start the onboarding process and fully complete that background check process and everything prior to the start date. So they'll be handling all logistics from that point on. And make sure you keep an eye on your email throughout the process, as you'll receive several communications from us. Okay, so to delve a little bit more into our code signal process. So the code signal is really going to be 70 minutes. The testing links do expire after 14 days, so just bear that in mind. And once you begin, you cannot pause. So you have to complete it all throughout. I highly recommend being in a quiet space where there are no distractions. So just keep that in mind that it will be about 70 minutes roughly. You will receive reminders to complete the assessment at the 2-day mark, the 7-day mark, and the 12-day mark. So there will be reminders. Make sure you check your spam folder in case you haven't received it within, that 24-hour window of applying. And then there are 40+ languages, so it is language agnostic. You're welcome to complete that in whatever format works best for you. And there are 4 coding tasks that can be completed in any process or order that works best for you. So just bear that in mind. As I mentioned, you want to make sure you have a non-distracting background. Make sure you review the instructions and answer everything to the best of your ability. Even if you don't finish everything in that 70-minute window, it doesn't mean that you haven't passed necessarily, but make sure you are pacing yourself throughout the coding assessment to give yourself adequate time to complete everything. All right, and so we'll move into the virtual interviewing process. So as I mentioned, all interviews will be held virtually. You will not be expected to come in person for any of these. The Power Day will be a 4-hour window, which I mentioned 3 interviews will happen in any order. So the way it's laid out here doesn't necessarily mean you'll have your behavioral first or whatnot. It will happen in any order. And so you'll have your behavioral interview, your case interview, and technical interview. Now all of the interviews are more conversational in nature, but the behavioral interview is without a doubt definitely the most conversational in nature. And like I said, we're really just trying to get to know you better. A lot of these with the behavioral interview will have questions like, tell me about a time when, or share an example of when maybe you had a conflict with a coworker or something like that. We believe past performance indicates future performance. So that's where the behavioral interview will come into play. You will certainly be able to ask any questions that you have about life at Capital One or the process. The behavioral interviewer may not necessarily be a technical interviewer. The case and technical interview will have software engineering related interviewers, so they'll be able to follow your coding process. With the case and technical interview, my best piece of advice is to really walk the interviewer through your thought process. You want to think back to when you were in math class. You can just say X is 15, right? You had to show each step for how you got to 15. And so that's essentially the same thought process you want to carry into the case and technical interview. So the case interview is unique to Capital One. There's more of a business guided concept combined with a coding element here. And we have several resources for preparing for the case interview ahead of your interview day. So once you're invited in for an interview, your recruiter will send you prep guides and additionally prep sessions to attend, kind of like this. And we'll go over, what to expect with a case interview and the the technical interview will be a separate prep session, but all of these resources will be provided in time for your interview. We ultimately want you to be successful in these interviews and have nothing be a surprise by the time you get to your interview day. So I highly, highly recommend attending these. They'll be really helpful as you prepare. So to go more in depth on these interviews, so as I mentioned with the behavioral, it's going to be, past and some present performance, but it'll be, mostly past experience that you've had. Now, I want to make sure I mention with the behavioral, if you have coding experience that you want to tie with this, wonderful. And you can, it doesn't have to be paid experience too that you utilize, right? It can be projects that you've done in school. Maybe you volunteered, in a STEM environment, and you taught sixth graders how to code. There could be so many experiences that you can expand on and tie into the behavioral. Now, if you don't necessarily have coding experience, then you can always tie in experience, like maybe you were part of hackathon for coding. If you were part of, like a sports team or something like that, I would recommend expanding on any collaboration experience you have there or something like that. A lot of these will be open-ended questions. You want to make sure you prepare for this interview. And when preparing, you don't want to have specific answers because the questions we ask you will be, quite broad, and we want to make sure you don't pigeonhole yourself into answering certain questions a certain way. So make sure you think of plenty of examples that you have that would be relevant to the behavioral interview. For the case interview, as I mentioned, it's going to be a business situation, and you'll have to be, kind of approaching the interview with an analytical mindset. There will be some low-level basic algebra that will be asked of you. You'll be allowed to have a calculator for that interview, but no other outside reference materials or anything. The case interview is going to be more collaborative as opposed to the behavioral and technical. So those are going to be more self-driven, more independent. The case interview is unique in that, the interviewer can't give you the answers, but it will be a collaborative exercise that you work through together. And so we just want to see what your approach is with solving the problem there. The technical interview is going to be more high-level algorithm or system design type of questions. You can expect to be asked about OOP, data structures, algorithms, topics like that, general coding questions. And we are looking for, what your interest is in the company. So although this is a technical interview, we'll be looking future forward as well. So you can expect to be asked about, again, we want to get to know you. You can be expected to be asked about what your interest is in the company, what you're looking to do. We really just want to hear about what projects you want to be involved in. And so as you apply, I would really think about why you spent the time in applying and why this program specifically is of interest to you and how can we help you further your career. All right, so 7, quick tips here just to keep in mind. So read all emails, like I mentioned. We have several bits of communication that come out from Capital One. So if you are not receiving any emails from us, then that's something to look into. Make sure you check your spam folder or any other folders, or make sure that you are checking the email that you applied to, because that's where we'll send all of that communications. Check your computer, internet for your interview process. You want to make sure that you're plugging in your laptop so you don't have any battery shortages throughout the interview. And you can do this like the day before your interview, or even, the morning of, just make sure everything's good to go. We do allow 45 minutes with an additional 15 minutes on reserve in case any of those technical issues arise. Those happen in this day and age. So the whole block of time will be an hour long for your interview. So just bear that in mind. If your interview does end a little early, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It just means that that's the block of time. Consider your surroundings. So if you're interviewing and also completing the code signal assessment, just make sure that you let your roommates know or family know, or whoever is with you, that you will be interviewing and do need a non-distracting background. So you should be the only person in there. And if you've got a dog or something, ask them to watch them throughout the interview. Dress for success. I always recommend, erring on the side of business professional. As you can see, we do extend certain comfort to our associates, so don't be alarmed if your interviewers are not wearing business professional throughout the interview. But you want to make sure that you are wearing what makes you feel confident. So it's best judgment there. But again, really dress for what makes you feel successful and confident. We all have that, that dress that we're like, we're good to go and we feel good in. So I recommend keeping that in mind. There's nothing wrong coming prepared with questions. We are an inquisitive bunch here, and we always welcome all these questions. As you can see with the Q&A chat, we're welcoming of all of those and happy to answer any and all questions. And again, remember, like, you're also interviewing the company. So, or your potential teammates and so on and so forth. And you really need to get a pulse on what it is like or whatever is important to you as you consider your career journey. If you hit a technical snag, don't panic. We've got the 45 minutes on reserve with the 15 minutes additional just in case something happens. But you have, ahead of your interview day, you'll receive your recruiter's information and a point of contact throughout the day in case anything happens. So feel free to communicate easily with them. And then at the end of the day, just be yourself. That's all that we ask of you. And share your passions. We're really excited to hear about that. So I will pass it over to Claire. I think we're wrapping up here.
Yeah, we have some really good questions that I do always love when you share the details about like making the interview a conversation and like getting to know us. It's a chance for you to get to know Capital One as well. I think that sometimes we get so nervous going into these interviews, right, that we forget that like, oh, I need to make sure I like it there too, and I like those people and I will fit in there. So I always love when you remind people to use the interview as a space to get to know the company as well. We had some really, really good questions. There are a few that I think I can just fire off. We are running out of time. So there is one that has come up. Eric has asked a few times about, specifically he's asking about the finance interns and what their responsibilities are. But I can just share generally for all interns. I can speak specifically to finance because I used to work with that program, but I know for all of interns that the work that is assigned to interns as well as development program associates is actual, impactful, important work at Capital One. Our managers know the caliber of talent that we're bringing in at these internships and in these development programs, and they are competing to get this talent on their team. So they are going to get this talent fun and attractive work that is going to be supportive and helpful of the Capital One, of driving the mission and the goals. So there won't be any gathering coffee or picking up dry cleaning. Like, we certainly would never waste our caliber of talent on personal and supportive types of responsibilities like that. So I wanted to just answer that one quick. In fact, we have a roadshow. Every year where Rich spends 3 or 4 days talking to the whole company about our strategy. Rich is our CEO, talking about our strategy. And in that roadshow this past summer, he talked about a project that a bunch of interns have done and the massive impact that it had on the whole company. And it was tech interns that he spoke about specifically. So I just driving that home, that our interns are valuable talent to help drive towards our mission. We had a question here about cover letters. Quickly, do you want to address cover letters, Brian, and what their importance are or is not in the application process? Do you have an opinion on cover letters?
Cover letters. So this is a hot topic for sure. We don't ask for cover letters here, so bear that in mind. You won't have to complete a cover letter for this. If you feel compelled to, it is a great way to highlight that. But in my opinion, everything that you've shared in your resume is what you're going to put on the cover letter. So there's no need to be duplicative there. There are some companies that will request it, but we are very tech forward here, very modern. We try to keep up with the times and everything. So to that end, I would say don't worry about a cover letter for our students and grad roles.
Awesome. And then I saw that there was another great question about not having much experience in what you are applying for and how to still make yourself look like a good candidate, or how to, I'll rephrase it, how to share that you are a good candidate without having very relevant things. What are some tips that you have for that?
Great question. So I would say to make yourself seem like, the most appealing candidate, I would highly recommend showing what your passions are, maybe putting an objective statement there, what you're looking to do, showing your forward thinking. Again, Capital One's very forward thinking, very tech forward. Expand on any experiences you have that are remotely related, a lot of those transferable skills. Maybe show, maybe you're taking a seminar with LinkedIn Learning. There's so many one-day lessons that you can do. They're even like 25 minutes, or even you can utilize YouTube. That's a free resource if you don't necessarily have the funds for LinkedIn Learning. So anything that shows that you are taking initiative, a self-starter, willing to learn, anything that really displays that in those passions, I highly recommend. There's nothing wrong with putting those on your resume.
Awesome. Okay, and then I also love this question, and Sabrina, I love that it was they had asked you specifically because I know your story and growth and learning. Talked a little bit more about they asked a little bit about your shift to software and how you've found good learning and how Capital One has been supportive of your learning journey. We are heading up on time, but I did want to give you a moment because I know you have a great story in that space.
For me personally, both of my parents are software engineers. So when I was growing up, I was like, there is no chance that I'm doing exactly what y'all did. They both have master's degrees in computer science too. And I was like, computer science sounds really boring. I don't think I really want to do this. And then, so I did take a computer science class in high school, but how high school classes are, they're really focused around the AP exam. They weren't really as fun, I think, as college computer science classes. And then when I went to college, I really wanted to become either an investment banker or a consultant. Quickly realized just from talking again, like we mentioned, you're interviewing the the employer as much as the employer is interviewing you. So I talked to all of these consulting and investment banking companies and quickly realized that this was not kind of exactly what I wanted to do with my career, with my life. So I took some more tech classes, so computer science classes specifically, really enjoyed the critical thinking and problem solving skills I got to utilize in those classes. Plus, a lot of my friends who were kind of more on the computer science path kind of showed me what they were doing with their internships, how they were using tech to really impact the real world. And I kind of got sucked in by that. So there is no time limit to where you can kind of enjoy technology, join us in software engineering, data engineering, or just in tech in general. And if you're not, even if you decide to go another route, non-tech route, I would definitely encourage you to take a computer science class just because it is really fun.
Yeah, I love that. And Sydney, do you want to, I know that CODA was a great learning journey for you. Can you talk about your learning journey post CODA as well, or even just the support that you received within the program?
Yeah, a little bit of background about me. So I majored in cognitive science, and all through college, I knew I wanted to become a software engineer, but I was afraid that because I didn't have the computer science degree, companies wouldn't want me. I thought they would just screen me out based on that major. So when I actually found CODA through a previous graduate who also went to USC, and she was a chemical engineer. And she was able to go through the CODA program and go through Tdp. And now she's an iOS engineer doing great things. So I thought that was really inspirational. And I decided to also apply to the CODA program. And you learn full stack web development for 6 months. And they start you off as if you know nothing. They teach you all about the variables. They start from day one, which is really great. Even though I had some experience, I still learned so much in CODA program that I think helped me in my Tdp rotations that I don't think the support I would have gotten if I had just jumped straight into Tdp. So being at Capital One for those extra 6 months really prepared me for my Tdp rotations. And also just the friendship and community that you get through the CODA program in Tdp. Everyone's there to help you, and it's great.
I love that. All right, well, Brandon, I think we are just at time. Thank you so much for this opportunity to present to the Way Up. Thank you everyone so much for attending. It's been our pleasure to share with you some tips and tricks, and hopefully we also were able to share our love of working for Capital One, and maybe you'll find a space here too. Brianne, as always, thank you for bringing your recruiter knowledge and expertise, as well as just those Q&As. You always do such a good job of handling those, typing those answers so quickly. Sydney and Sabrina, we enjoyed sharing you with this Way Up community. Thank you so much for your time today in this event. We really appreciate it. Brandon, I'm going to pass it back to you and let you close this out.
All righty, my pleasure. Thank you all so much again, just to reiterate, for attending this amazing event. Hope you learned a lot. I know I did. So I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and make sure to check out their company profile if you want to learn more about them. You can find that in the chat. Once again, thank you all so much for taking the time, and have a great rest of your day.